But, my Lords, I rise again to move amendments that appear in my own name, starting with Amendment 144F. And I think this is perhaps moving on back to a somewhat larger scale. 144F would amend the Representation of the People Act 1983, brackets forfeiture deposit, to return the election deposits to all general election candidates whose registered party achieves at least one MP. And I think those of your members of your Lordship's House who are still paying acute attention at this hour of the evening might have noticed that I have to declare an interest, perhaps, at this point. However, the one MP point is not just randomly chosen or chosen for self-interest. The fact is that it surprises many voters when they find out that to stand in a general election you have to pay a £500 deposit. And maybe many say, well, £500 one-off, that's not that large a sum of money. It is to many people in many communities, but maybe it doesn't seem that much. But of course, when you put this on a national scale, and I will take the example of the Green Party, if you look at the 2019 election, 465 lost deposits cost us £232,500, best part of £250,000. Now, I'm aware that to some political parties that might look like more or less the change down the back of the sofa, but to us it's a massive sum of money. And it's a sum of money that is largely raised, in our case, by crowdfunding at a local level, people putting their £10 or £20 in to support local democracy. And what we have is a very odd situation, and here I come to the explanation of why the one MP criteria is in there. Because what we also have in our system is what's known as short punt money. It was introduced in the Commons in 1975, and it's available to all opposition parties that have either secured 2 seats or 1 seat and more than 150,000 votes at the previous general election. And it's payable to qualifying parties for £18,400 for every seat won at the last election, plus £36 for every 200 votes gained by the party. And this is something when people say to me, oh, I think my vote has been wasted because it didn't elect someone, it's always worth pointing out that actually it does have an impact in terms of short money. But in the context of this amendment, what we have is a situation where the state is deliberately giving money to parties who've won at least 1 seat and got a certain number of votes, and with the other hand taking it away in terms of election deposits. Now, this is effectively a tax on democracy. And it's interesting if we look at the comparison to many other democracies around the world, and in earlier groups we were talking about comparisons in many ways, how we would appear to fall short compared to other democracies. Many other democracies in Europe and in other parts of the world actually fund the operations of their political parties on a regular basis, not just in Parliament, but in terms of funding research, in terms of funding election campaigns, because they acknowledge that actually, if we are not all collectively funding politics, the people who do fund that politics are the ones who then get the politics they've paid for. And we are now in a situation where we are getting the politics that's paid for by a relatively small number of people. And the situation of election deposits makes that far worse. Now, I'll be interested to hear from the government what their current justification for election deposits are, but I would expect that they might say that this £500 deposit discourages frivolous running for office, discourages joke candidates, at which point I would invite them to look at any list of candidates standing in any general election, or particularly any particularly high-profile by-election, and see that it doesn't really seem to achieve that job. But if the government doesn't like 144F and the immediate step to ending this tax on democracy, I do have the alternative amendment 212F, which is a simpler and less immediate action. It calls for a review of election deposits and an exploration of alternatives. So that, if the government were to acknowledge that there is an issue here, an issue that deserves to be explored, an issue that should be considered, then 212F is a way of getting to that, taking a longer, more considered view of how we might approach this situation and ending this barrier to democracy. And as we were discussing in the earlier group, the government said in their statements, their impact statements about this bill, their aim is to improve access to democracy, while taking away deposits could be one important step for that. So, my Lords, I beg to move.